Hello, this is Dr. Schmo from the Functional Neurology Center, and this is a part of our Technologies and Traumatic Brain Injury mini-series. Today I'm here with Katie Winter. She's a functional medicine educator with 18 years of experience, and she currently works with Xymogen. And today she's going to be talking about magnesium and its effects on cognition and brain function and why it is so important. So thank you so much for coming on here with us today.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor and a privilege to be here and to share some information with you. I hope I can provide some good pearls for understanding some of the differences in delivery systems and forms of magnesium. Excuse me. And we'll go over the research specifically on how magnesium influences brain health, healthy brain aging, the stress response, and some of the mood aspects that magnesium influences as well.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to make you the host. And then you should be able to share your screen right now.
Sweet. All right, so magnesium is exciting to me because it influences a lot of aspects of brain health as well as whole body health. So just, as a disclaimer, as Dr. Schmo mentioned, I am a Xymogen employee, customer, and shareholder. I'm a professional educator, wife, and mother, and fellow human being. And of course, none of this stuff I'm about to say has been evaluated by the FDA, so this is all Xymogen's choice of presentation of materials. So magnesium, as you may know, is a cofactor in more than 300 different enzyme reactions in the body. And it's a very, very diverse mineral that's involved in protein synthesis and muscle, nerve function, blood sugar regulation, blood pressure, and it's required for energy production. And it also plays a role in heart rhythms and nerve impulses and conductions and mood. And it's got a lot of things that it does. And unfortunately, most people don't get enough of it. So this data is from back in 2005. And it was found that almost half of the US population consumed less than the required amount of magnesium from food. And unfortunately, it was trending in the wrong direction because in 2001, the percentage was much higher. And you may recognize some of these symptoms of deficiency because they include headache and dizziness, confusion, poor concentration, jumpiness, migraine. And then a lot of systemic effects too. So a lot of cramping. Magnesium is really, really important for allowing your muscles to relax. So it plays a role in, leg cramps and thigh cramps and calf cramps. So, if you're experiencing some of these symptoms, magnesium deficiency could be a culprit. So specifically, as it relates to brain health, I chose this graphic here because it really is it makes the whole system weak if you have magnesium deficiency on top of having potential brain injury or, any kind of post-traumatic stress syndrome. Because magnesium deficiency will basically starve the brain of nutrition because it supports mitochondrial function, and mitochondria are your energy powerhouses inside of each cell. So that's what helps make energy. So if you don't have enough magnesium, we see some dysfunction in mitochondrial health. And we also see enhanced neuronal excitability. And what that means is that your neurotransmitter for seizure and for migraine, which is called glutamate, it can have some enhanced effects on the brain, which leads to anxiety and discomfort and long-term excitotoxic effects on the brain.
Yeah, I mean, with concussion and traumatic brain injury, we know that biochemical aspect is occurring in the brain, with trauma and changes in glutamate and brain-based inflammation. So, I mean, we've seen clinically that utilizing magnesium has been very, very helpful in many of our patients.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so profoundly effective in terms of supporting the brain function. So this is World Health Organization data. And they estimate that, within 10 years, this is 2020 now, which is funny. Sometimes I'll think of 20 years ago as being 1980, but actually 2030 is 10 years from now. It's estimated that 65.7 million humans on the planet will have cognitive impairment, and that within 20 years of that, we'll see like a doubling. And currently there's more than 5 million people with Alzheimer's disease, and that's projected to be about 16 million, so a tripling by 2050. And it's currently the 6th leading cause of death. So this is a big problem for a lot of people, cognitive impairment, cognitive decline. And not only does it influence the person who's affected by it, and I think that with brain injury, this cognitive decline just definitely is accelerated. Would you agree with that?
I would agree.
Yeah, so it's not only, you know, affecting the person who has the brain injury and the cognitive deficits, but also the caregivers, right? We now are seeing a significant proportion of the population required to help care for these people. So it's a big issue. So some of the challenges with brain health and magnesium is, number one, reducing overall magnesium deficiency, and number two, actually getting magnesium to the brain, right? So if it's true, which it is, that magnesium is involved in more than 300 different reactions, and also that most of us are not getting enough of it, the body will triage its, you know, whatever comes in to support immediate needs. So a lot of times it never gets to the brain. And the problem is if you take a handful of magnesium, we're limited by the gastrointestinal side effects. So if you've ever had, it's one of my favorite ways to deal with constipation actually is magnesium citrate, because, you know, it'll cause all the muscles to relax and a nice evacuation of the bowel.
Yeah.
But it's a limitation as it relates to increasing overall body and brain magnesium, because most people don't want to have that happen. So this is a little cartoon about what happens to the synapse over time. And this is really telling in my mind, kind of the way that I think about, you know, neurotransmission. So you have your presynaptic neuron and your postsynaptic neuron, and the neurons will send neurotransmitters across that synapse in order to communicate with each other, which is really important for memory and cognition and function. And as we age, and particularly with, you know, brain injury or predisposition to Alzheimer's disease and magnesium deficiency and all these different things, we actually see a shrinking of the morphology of that neuron itself. And so what this kind of feels like to me is when you're driving along and you're going 70 miles an hour on your 5-lane highway, and all of a sudden it drops to 1 lane, right? You're not going to get as many cars through on that highway. And it's the same thing with neurotransmission, right? You're not going to get as many chemical messengers across that space if the actual physical the surface area is shrinking. So that's a big component in memory impairment. And so what I'm going to talk to you about today is a brain-specific magnesium called magnesium L-threonate. And this material has been studied at MIT for over 10 years, and it's really been developed to enhance brain function and brain power. And many brain supplements, or brain-specific supplements, and pharmacologics for that are basically will stimulate the brain so that you feel awake and focused, you know, when you take it, right? Like caffeine, like you drink a cup of coffee and your brain is like awake and stimulated. Yeah. The problem is that if you do that long term, that stimulation can really cause an excitotoxicity, which is really bad for the brain. So the benefit of this particular form of magnesium is that it doesn't just stimulate the brain or inhibit anything. It just helps the brain stay healthy so that it can respond with clarity and robustness. And who doesn't want clarity and robustness with their brain?
Everybody wants that.
Right? I want that. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to talk about, remember I mentioned the limitation of magnesium is that it is the gut. And so we'll talk about how the actually gets to the blood, you know, or to the brain, excuse me, crossing that blood-brain barrier, raising those magnesium levels in the brain. And then what does it do once it gets there? So these are all animal studies that I'm going to go over, because there's you can do more things with animals, and as you're evaluating a novel compound, you have to actually go through, you know, the research steps. So there's in vitro studies, and then there's animal studies, and then we move into human clinical studies. So these next slides are going to be about animal studies, specifically in rats and mice, and they found that the Magtein actually increased the short-term synaptic facilitation and long-term potentiation, and improved learning and memory functions. So of those two limitations of magnesium, getting it into the brain and then eliciting an effect, they actually validated both of those. So the way that they did the evaluation of getting it into the brain is they gave these animals, there was the control, right? They didn't give those animals anything. And then they had one group, the solid circles, they gave the Magtein, and then the square was the magnesium chloride, and then that open triangle is the magnesium glycinate with milk, which I'm not really sure why they gave it with milk. Perhaps it increased absorption. I don't know. But as you can see, and then they took a spinal tap, so they evaluated cerebral spinal fluid magnesium levels. And as you can see, of the forms of magnesium that they tested, which are all good forms of magnesium that you may see in your supplements, the Magtein was the only one that really, had a substantial increase in cerebral spinal fluid levels of magnesium. And then they looked at actually, how does it work? Does it help your short-term memory and working memory and long-term memory? And you'll see, again, of the 3 different forms of magnesium, Magtein had the greatest effect. And obviously in younger animals, there was a bigger effect than there was in older animals. And so if you look on the graph on the right, they administered the Magtein for 30 days, and then they took the animals off of this Magtein, and you can see that their cognition, working memory dropped almost to baseline, and then they gave it to them again, and then it increased. So really, creating that distinct link between I'm giving this product to you and you're having this effect is essentially what this study is saying. Well, animals. And then if we looked at the histology of this, so this is where they actually take a section of the brain tissue itself, they evaluated the synaptic density. So this is, if you remember my little cartoon of the synapses and how it changes over time, and we see that highway going from 5 lanes down to 2. This is an actual visual representation of what that looks like in the brain. And you'll see that there is a significant enhancement of synaptic density with the Magtein on. And then once the animals went off of the Magtein, it returned almost back to normal, but there was still a modest elevation. This is also a really interesting concept called fear extinction that was evaluated in rats. And basically, fear extinction is the ability to lay new memories over old memories. And so I think this is particularly important for traumatic brain injury, because when we have something really, really, really powerfully traumatic happen to us, we tend to revisit it a lot, right? The brain's primary job is to keep us safe. And so when something traumatic happens, it's real easy to sort of lose control to our fears, right? And so we have this fear memories, it increases our risk to anxiety and to worry, and that can influence our mood and our sleep. And animals that had higher levels of brain magnesium had actually healthier memory extinction. So this is the process by which we can put a new memory over an old memory without losing the protective impact of the memory.
That's really
And so what is this? It's an active learning process. And it helps us to adapt to new situations without losing the protective effects of whatever traumatic thing happened. So the way that they study this in animals is they will actually condition the rats to associate an auditory event. So they ring a bell, and then they follow it with an electrical shock, right? So they condition these animals to expect to have a pain sensation followed by hearing a ringing of a bell. And then they remove the pain sensation, and they ring the bell, and then they quantify how long the animals freeze, right? And so this is what it looks like in the paper. You'll see they gave one group 4 weeks of Magtein. Remember this animal study. So that 4 weeks on Magtein, and then their control, they gave nothing. And then for 3 days, they conditioned these animals to associate that pain sensation with that ringing of the bell. And then they took away the pain sensation, they rang the bell, and then they quantified how long these animals froze. And so that graph on the far right on day 6 is basically a visual representation of how quick these animals learned that they weren't going to get shocked. And this is really important, right? Because a lot of times when something happens to us, we will relive it over and over and over and over again. And we will go through like the same physiological reactions in our body. And so to be able to, we never want to bypass anything that happens to us. We want to, maintain the memory of it, but we don't want to relive it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to anyways.
Yeah. We see that with patients all the time, and like, we'll just move their heads in specific directions that maybe they might have had during their trauma, and it will just trigger an autonomic, like sympathetic fear-based response. And, they might have a panic attack, or they might get very, very sweaty or dizzy or lightheaded or feel like they're going to pass out just from, like, we had a person where we would just put them on their stomach and put their head into a certain canal position, and they would develop all of these just limbic based symptoms, and they would start crying and laughing. It was it was really, really interesting. So, I mean, these responses are just built into the body. And if we can do something like utilize magnesium to change that, that's huge.
Yeah, yeah. Well, our brain is really wired to change. It's wired for plasticity. And I love this set of slides, and it's more histological representations of what's going on inside, because if you look at this prefrontal cortex slides and the control versus Magtein, you see that the brains of these animals, they change physically, right? They have a higher, excuse me, amount of synaptic density in the prefrontal cortex, but nothing changed in the amygdala, right? In the fear center, where we store that fear, there was no change in it. There was only a change in how we reacted to it.
Okay.
So it's pretty powerful data. So this is moving on into synaptic loss and cognitive deficits in Alzheimer's disease. This is a pretty interesting animal study where they looked at transgenic mice. So these mice have a genetic predisposition to producing amyloid precursor plaquing. So again, whenever there's an injury to the brain, there's actually an increased susceptibility to amyloid plaque. And so I find this relevant for your patient population, because there's some fascinating studies on how Magtein influences that plaquing. So these mice, they were, like I said, they were genetically altered to have Alzheimer's disease. And in initial comparisons, the ones that were given Magtein had greater learning. The ones that they performed very similarly to the wild type mice, and it helped to preserve the normal brain function. And here's what the data looks like. Again, with the on the top graphs there, the open circle, those are your transgenic mice. So these are the mice with Alzheimer's disease. And then the closed circle and the triangles, this is comparing the transgenic mice with Alzheimer's disease who've been taking the Magtein, or being given the Magtein, and compared to the wild type. And you'll see both at 7 months and 15 months, the transgenic mice performed very similarly to the wild type mice. And again, we saw that reflected in the histological data in the slides below. So really enhancing that synaptic density. And again, going back to that cartoon of the loss of that morphology. And then what it looks like with the amyloid plaque, and remember, these animals had, they had greater genetic predisposition to forming these proteins that cause this plaque. And comparing the transgenic mice to the transgenic mice with Magtein, there's a significant difference in the amount of plaquing, both in the frontal cortex and the hippocampus. And this is interesting data. This is the same study where they looked at the end stage Alzheimer's disease. So with, mice have a shorter lifespan, so you can do more with age in a shorter period of time. And the two graphs on the top, the A and C, are short-term memory and long-term memory. And then B and D, the graphs on the bottom, are after 1 month of Magtein supplementation. And so, like, what's really cool to me is even with these mice that are sort of at the end stage of this pathology, there was significant changes in how they responded. So recognition index means how much time did they spend with an object they were just introduced to versus, like introduced to a month ago for the long-term memory. And what you want to see is those numbers go down. And so in all cases, both with a novel object as well as object they had seen before, their recognition index percentage went down. So they saw it and they were like, I've already seen that before. I don't need to look at that. Basically, this is my anthropomorphizing. But basically they didn't spend as much time with it because they'd already seen it before. So they learned much more quickly, if that makes sense. And then interestingly, these mice also lived longer. So not only did they get a higher quality of life with the incorporation of Magtein, but they actually had a longer quantity of life as well. So they lived almost as long as the wild type mouse, right? Actually, it looks like they lived longer than the wild type. So it helped increase their lifespan. So those are some of the animal studies. And now I'm going to show you a human clinical trial, which I think is pretty powerful. The nice thing about animal studies is that we can do things like, cerebrospinal taps to address actual levels of magnesium in the brain. You can't really do that in, in human clinical trials, at least not in one that I would volunteer for. So having that foundation is nice, but then what we really want to see is, well, how does this really impact human physiology and human cognition? And so the two research points that they really wanted to evaluate were, how does Magtein influence body magnesium status, and how does it influence memory and cognition? So the participants in this study, they ranged from 50 to 70 years old. They dosed the Magtein based on weight. So older subjects that weighed a little bit more had, got a higher dose. And they stratified it, so it's just patients with mild cognitive impairments, anxiety, and sleep issues, as opposed to, they really wanted to rule out patients with dementia and Alzheimer's disease. And they were evaluated at day 0, at 6 weeks, and 12 weeks. There's 50 people. So here's how they evaluated the amount of magnesium into the body. So they looked at 3 different measurements, because as I mentioned, doing a spinal tap is not, people don't like that. So they measured the urinary metabolites, and they measured the magnesium in the plasma, and then they also measured intracellular magnesium and red blood cells. And so as you can see, in all 3 measurements, there was a dramatic increase in the amount of magnesium in the body. Mm-hmm. And then for memory and cognition, there was 4 different evaluation tools that they used. They used a trail mapping test, which evaluates executive function. There was a digit span, so they're basically given a series of numbers to address working memory. And then there was a flanker test, which is kind of, it's like you follow a trail and then they're trying to like distract you and make it difficult for you to pay attention to. So really like assesses your ability to focus on one thing. And then episodic memory with name-face association. And so in all 4 aspects, there was a significant increase in function with the use of, and they call it MMFS, which is like it is the Magtein. It's just what they called it in this research, as compared to placebo. So definitely profound changes in memory and function and cognition. And it's really difficult to kind of like put a single number on intelligence, right? Because there's so many different aspects to how our brain works. There's reasoning, and spatial ability, and memory, and processing speed. And so there's a little bit of mathematical wizardry that happens when you're trying to compare apples to apples, and people that have a variety of different ways that they assess their score on these different 4 tests. Mm-hmm. And so what they did, which I think is pretty cool, is they took the results of all 4 of these different assessments, and then they did some mathematical like wizardry that I won't even pretend to understand. And they assigned the study group brain age. So at the beginning of this 12-week trial, the average brain age was 69.6 years. Okay. And at the 6-week mark, the average brain age actually dropped to 60 years, and it persisted for the 12 weeks, right? So this is pretty awesome, because who doesn't want a younger brain, right?
100%.
Like a brain, please.
Magtein is the fountain of youth.
Yeah, well, as it relates to brain, for sure it is. Yeah. Absolutely. And then adverse events were actually interestingly higher in the placebo group than they were in the treatment group, which is what you want to see, right? Yeah. Some good side effects. And then, so that's specifically on Magtein. So that's our patented brain formula, our brain magnesium compound. And now I'm going to show you some studies on just magnesium without really specifying which form. So magnesium is important in our ability to attenuate stress and manage stress. And, we pretty much all live in chronic stress. And so this is just one more tool in your toolbox for helping to deal with the stress response and reduce some of the symptoms associated with stress, including depression. It also, as I mentioned, it increases fear extinction. And this has been shown again and again with magnesium in general. And really it's really helpful for worrying, anxiety disorders, and as you're saying, like just helping to sort of heal from a really traumatic event. Yeah. And as we age, our ability to sleep does change, right? So this magnesium can play a role in sort of reversing some of these age-associated impacts that are negatively affecting our sleep. And also and it could be related to restless leg syndrome, for example. So I remember I talked about how magnesium can play a role in relaxing our muscles in our body. So this is a study showing that it reduces RLS. And then this is another study looking at just like general sleep hygiene. So this is a subjective assessment of older adults with insomnia. And they kind of looked at how does magnesium influence the ability to get to sleep, to stay asleep, or to have like a refreshing, healthy sleep cycle series, overnight, waking up healthy or waking up awake. It's early in the morning, Dr. Schmo.
I know.
Some magnesium really helps with sort of all aspects of sleep hygiene. And then we also see mood, right? And magnesium, even with like major depression, like this was a pretty, these were patients that had major depression. Within 7 days of taking magnesium, they had improvements in their mood. So, not only are you doing something to really promote health and function and cognition and memory in your brain, but also like helping to just improve quality of life with dealing with depression. I mean, it's a really powerful little product. So this is, I'm going to talk a little bit about my product next because it's pretty unique.
Okay.
It has so this OptiMag Neuro is the name of our product with Xymogen, and it comes in two flavored options and one unflavored option. And the novelty of this delivery system is that because it's powdered, you can get it in pretty much anyone. Whether they're young children or older adults. I do think that this product is appropriate for pretty much any age demographic because we require magnesium throughout our entire lifespan. And then with the powder delivery system, you can easily change the dosing of the magnesium that you're delivering.
Yeah. I mean, I give it to my 14-month-old and she loves it.
That's so awesome.
Yeah.
And the unflavored form is actually not bad. So there's a berry flavor and a lemon lime flavor that are pretty sweet, but the unflavored is you can't even hardly taste it. So it can mix in easily with anything.
Okay.
And, a lot of times when people have, like older patients will have, taste aversions or not want to have, a lot of strong flavors. So it's nice to have that unflavored option too for them. So there is, in our particular product, OptiMag Neuro, we do have the Magtein in there at the therapeutic dose of 1 milligram per scoop. But we've also added in 2 other forms of magnesium. So there's the dimagnesium malate and the magnesium isonate glycinate. And hopefully, what I want to kind of articulate is because magnesium is utilized by so many different body systems, we have a little bit of influence with what we connect the magnesium to as to where it goes in the body, right? So if you just go to the store and buy magnesium, chances are you're probably going to get the cheapest and least effective form of magnesium, which is magnesium oxide. And when you take that particular form, your body only really gets about 10% of that, right? Because there's a lot of work it has to do to get it into the body. It's hard for the body to work with. These are forms that are actually absorbed intact. They're di and tripeptide forms. They don't require any digestive function on our behalf. And then because they're bound to these amino acids, it sort of determines where they go in the body. So the dimagnesium malate, malic acid is really important for mitochondrial energy production, which is, our cells need to be able to make energy for us to have a functioning, healthy life. So malic acid is really important for that. And then the heart muscle is, as it's so concentrated in glycine, magnesium glycinate will a lot of times have its most profound effect on the heart muscle. And then of course the Magtein, as we've been talking about, is like a handle. It pulls it right into the brain. So basically the clinical applications of this product are that it supports not only healthy brain magnesium, but healthy body magnesium levels, synaptic function and health and cognition, memory, sleep management, stress management, sleep quality, and a healthy mood.
Perfect.
And that's it.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, we're basically, all of our patients are going on OptiMag Neuro. And, clinically, we've seen huge changes in everything that you've mentioned. And it happens really fast. I mean, some people will come back in 3 days later and go like, what was that stuff that you gave me? Because that was crazy. Like I was having dreams like I've never had dreams before in my life, and my sleep changed in a very short period of time. Like I actually noticed that with myself. I remember the very first night that I took OptiMag Neuro, I woke up the next day, I was like, wow. I mean, that was a very, very interesting night. My sleep was better, my dreams were better, and overall it just felt just less anxiety, less fatigue. So I think it's an amazing product. It's
Awesome.
very important for patients with traumatic brain injury, dizziness, autonomic dysfunction. With traumatic brain injury, there's changes that are going on centrally in the brain, and you can get glial priming, and you get these brain-based inflammatory responses. When you injure the brain, you change the integration with your gut, so that can change the absorption of some vital nutrients that you might need. And then you get changes in this gut inflammation, and that leaks back up into the brain and then kind of winds up some of these inflammatory pathways. So if you can do some other things, in addition to magnesium, like vitamin D and curcumin and resveratrol, these things can help basically repair the blood-brain barrier, and then allow, good things to get into the brain and keep the bad things out, to keep that brain-based inflammation down and allow the brain to heal. So we're always trying to improve neurological circuits. We want to get your balance centers better, like your cerebellum and your vestibular system, and work on memory centers like your hippocampus, and get your frontal lobe better. And with all of that, what that does is that fires down to help regulate your autonomics and regulate your limbic system. So if we can do things neurologically and nutritionally to help that and speed the process up, like why would we not do that?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
we run labs on people. We check magnesium levels. Sometimes they're just like a little bit low, and even when they're a little bit low, then we start giving it. And even if they come back normal, we have people take OptiMag Neuro anyways, because there could still be brain magnesium changes with blood, like plasma or RBC levels being normal.
Yeah. Yeah, because you
So
can't measure unless you
yeah,
do like that CSF
yeah.
test. You
So
can only measure the magnesium in the brain.
yeah, so that's why I think it's very important for providers and patients to actually look at all of the symptoms of magnesium deficiency,
Right?
and like have like a checklist and go check, 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 check. I do it in my head. So when I go through people's history, I'm like, that sounds like this, that sounds like that, that sounds like that sounds like magnesium deficiency, that sounds like thiamine deficiency. So we run those things, through Vibrant America. We'll run like a micronutrient panel and look at RBC magnesium. We'll look at thiamine levels. We'll look at B12. We'll look at like methylmalonic acid. We look at all these things and try and paint a picture of what's going on with people from all aspects, neuro, metabolic, and then in terms of just like structure and pain, if magnesium can help with, restless legs and make nerves not be so excitable, then that could be very huge for people to get them out of pain, and then their sleep can get better.
Yeah.
And if magnesium helps their frontal lobe work better to regulate their limbic system, why wouldn't you do that? And I just think it's a great product. So I'm super happy for having you on here. And
Oh, thank you so much. And there definitely is a ripple effect, right? When we don't feel good in our brain, when we're
yeah,
depressed, when we're fearful, when we're anxious, it actually ripples into all of our relationships and our quality of life. And so like it's really important that we leverage all the tools that are available, like you're saying.
and like you were saying, it's very important to take care of the caregivers too. So a lot of the people are like, can I take that product too? I'm like, heck yeah, take
Yeah,
OptiMag Neuro. Like,
exactly.
get two of them, take it, because you're going to feel better.
Yeah.
So, and then with the product, I haven't seen people have GI like side effects with it either. So,
Not that you would typically see. I had one doctor that I work with that had a concussion, and she was dealing with migraines constantly, and she said that this was the only product that touched her migraine
okay,
post concussion, and she had worked up to 5 scoops per day.
okay,
So she did experience some GI effects at that mega dose,
yeah,
but like that was the only dose that really kept the inflammation in her brain down.
yeah, that's very cool. I've seen some patients that are like, they're so wound up, their limbic system is so wound up when you take the product, and then they go from like here to here.
Crash.
They're like, what is happening to me? Like, I don't feel as good, but I'm like,
Floaty.
yeah, I'm like, just wait. I'm like, things are going to stabilize. Your neurons are going to stabilize, and then you're going to be at a level, and then you're going to feel good. We just
Exactly.
took you from being emotionally and your cognition from spinning to now like being stable. So this is what
Like a new
normal feels
standard.
like.
Yeah. And you know, the first time a person takes this product, I do recommend that you take it kind of in the late afternoon where you can lay down if you need to, because
Okay.
I do see that, like people kind of crash on it.
Yeah.
So, you know, I wouldn't do it right before bed the first time because, you know, it's just better to kind of be able to be awake and to feel the effects so
Yeah.
that you know something's going on,
Yeah.
but to also have the opportunity to lay down if you need to nap.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. That was great. And how can people find you? How can they get a hold of you if they have any questions about anything?
Oh, but you can, I work for Xymogen. So if you contact Xymogen, they can redirect you to my extension. You can also email me. It's my old name though. It's katie.loader, KATI.LODER at Xymogen.com if you
Okay.
should want to email me.
Yeah. All right. Great. Thank you so much. Thanks, Katie.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was really good to be on here. Thank you.